Hey, it's Mazzy, and let's continue with the submission for the Acid Archives. This is a continuation of a thread that Dom Seeking a Thread started maybe a couple months ago now, and I've done 2 submissions for it. This is a fantastic book. This is a second edition. You can still get this. It's about a $45 book you can get online. It's in print, and it's jam-packed with mostly independent records. You know, the theme is psychedelia and indie private press things, although there are some crossover things. Not everything is psychedelic. We're talking about psychedelic in the broader sense. And obviously, the record that I'm talking about here has nothing to do with psychedelic, maybe hippie culture in a way. And I am going to talk about the International Submarine Band, 1968, one of the early country rock albums. Now, that is a loaded thing because people like to cite specific records that this is the beginning of country rock. It was Sweetheart of the Rodeo. It was the Beau Brummels, Bradley's Barn. It was the International Submarine Band, which was recorded in 1967. It was Bob Dylan. It was the Beatles. The Beatles invented everything. Them doing I Don't Want to Spoil the Party. Them covering Buck Owens with, Ringo Seeking They're Going to Put Me in the Movies. The Beatles had a real country segment of their songwriting and their career. Not a lot. Ringo obviously was the big country gentleman in a way. You see what I did there? Country a fan, and of course his second solo album, Bukus of Blues, at 1970, I guess, was an all-country record recorded in Nashville. But rather than saying country rock, I think that the best thing about this, because it's not a rock album at all, really, but it's hippies doing country music. And I think that is, that's the kicker here. This is an album that I never knew about or heard about in 1968. I will read the contribution. Now, Dom, I've watched every contribution from these Acid Archive videos, and I think a lot of people have done them. And there's a link below to Dom's playlist of all these. And they're very entertaining. They're short, succinct. Maybe mine's rambling a little bit, but that's what I like to do. And he doesn't like marking his. I like marking. These are essentially all the ones I've found that I own. Not that I'm going to necessarily make videos and all these, but I have some. And I'll read the International Submarine listing. I would say it's a little outlier here because it's not a psychedelic record, but obviously it's because of mainly Graham Parsons here. Now, Graham Parsons, if you don't know his whole story, before his solo records, those great 2, the basic country rock records he did for Reprise Records, and of course his folk records and solo records and Flying Burrito Brothers, and of course the Byrds, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. This was pretty much his first band. Well, he was in bands before this, but that got signed, in this case, by Lee Hazelwood's label, Lee Hazelwood Production, produced by Susie Jane Hokum, who was Lee Hazelwood's girlfriend at the time, and saw them perform. Now, they were in New York for a while. Obviously, the thing here, which is an important part, as much as Graham Parsons had this passion for real country music, Hank Snow, Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, Porter Wagner, the Louvin Brothers. He was a trust fund kid, Florida money, big trust fund kid. And he moved to New York and he started this band. Eventually, they relocated in LA. However, most of the band came apart. They did a single in 1966 called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, a cover of the song that was the theme song for the movie that was a Carl Reiner movie that happened, that comedy in 1966. Did nothing. They go to LA, they're playing around the honky tonks. They're a honky tonk country band. And that was not really happening in terms of record sales and everything. Garage bands in 66, psychedelic pop hits and everything. But Lee Hazelwood, who would, really come to fruition as a producer and a songwriter, who had a real country essence and flavor to his music. Of course, he worked with Nancy Sinatra and wrote great songs like Boots Are Made for Walking. And the songs that he did on his own records that were reissued by Light in the Attic, as well as the Nancy Sinatra records. They do have a lot of a country influence here. So he signed this band, and they finally recorded this album, and this album is called Safe at Home. This is the Sundays reissue. This is an extremely rare record to find an original copy of, and this is a mono from the original master tapes, apparently, that Sundays did some years ago, and I would grab this because it sounds good. If you like country rock or country music done by hippies, you might like this. So this is the LA period, but before the album came out, Graham Parsons had quit the band, got an offer from the Byrds. The rest is history, of course. He's the one that brought a lot more of these country writers to the Byrds, and they put out that album that actually pretty much bombed as well, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, in 1968. Again, recorded in 67, came out in March 1968. I think Sweetheart came out August or September of that same year, so 5-6 months later, that came out. And again, it didn't, kick in 2 years later that influenced so many bands from all the country rock bands of the late 60s into the 70s, which I won't even cite here. But, if you like that music, you know who they are. This, again, is a good album mixed with 4 original compositions by Graham Parsons, plus covers of Hank Snow, Buck Owens, Merle Haggard. Folsom Prison Blues is on here. But they do more of a country rock honky-tonk versions of these songs. And, you could argue that Johnny Cash's version is even more rockin'. He comes from the whole rockabilly thing. So this illusion that these artists really kind of were pioneers, and I guess they were in terms of the new generation hippie culture and long hairs somewhat. I mean, look how well coiffed that is for 1967, 1968, this illustration. But this is a really good record, of course. To me, one of the great records, aside from Sweetheart, is especially the first Sweetheart. The very first Flying Burrito Brothers album. The name of the band was taken from Our Gang comedy. It was a hybrid of this character or this concept of this international submarine man. It was a little slightly different, and they changed it up for the name of this band. But again, he left the band. It wasn't a record that was promoted. Hazelwood's company killed it pretty much for the most part, and it's lived in infamy because of this, because of the fame of and what's the word I'm thinking of? Graham Parsons is contributed to being the guy that really pushed country rock, pushed the Byrds. But even think about this: the first few Byrds albums, that folk rock hybrid, had a lot of country influences. So they already had really country influences. Chris Hillman especially, and Roger McGuinn came from the folk scene. Hillman, kind of a bluegrass country scene as well. So the stuff was there, and I think Parsons sort of pushed them over to really go all in on it on that album, which really didn't help them commercially, the Byrds in 1968. But fantastic record. But let's look at the listing. I have it in blue here so I can find it quickly. Okay, this is written by SB. I can't remember who SB is, but when country rock emerges, a style Safe at Home received posthumous notice as one of the first true genres outing. With a mixture of covers and originals penned by Graham Parsons, tracks like I Must Be Somebody Else You've Known, Folsom Prison Blues, I Still Miss Someone, left no doubts to the band's country roots and interests. And that's something that's true, that Graham Parsons really was embedded in the true country, not the Nashville pop that would kind of come about later and stuff, but those true country artists, the Bakersfield sound and the Nashville sound as well. But that shouldn't scare anyone off, since the combination of Parsons' melancholy voice and a rhythm section of 1 foot firmly in the rock camp make for a thoroughly entertaining effort. I don't see it that rockish as this writer is stating. It is had that honky-tonk feel, so there is a little bit of a rock vibe with the drumming, maybe a little bit. But it's not like, obviously Poco or the Eagles some years later in that genre of country music. Parsons' originals, such as Blue Eyes and Luxury Liner, became genre standards. Years later, Emmylou Harris even titled one of her albums Luxury Liner, and especially over her first several solo albums, I think every album that Emmylou Harris did had a Graham Parsons song on it. While the album later generated a buzz among critics and musicians, it was too odd for mainstream radio upon release. Bingo. Exactly like Sweetheart of the Rodeo, exactly like the Beau Brummels' Bradley's Barn. There was no audience there for it yet. Two rock for country audiences and two country for rock audience. If you've ever heard the story of Graham Parsons and Jim McGuinn, or Roger McGuinn, riding a drugstore truck driving man because of the radio station in Nashville, I believe, or the Grand Ole Opry, booed the Byrds. They wouldn't play the song. They didn't like those hippie things. So they wrote that great song about this, what they termed as these right-wing DJs at the time that didn't like the hippies, like infiltrating their music, which was all too spot on. The band had a very good non-LP track, Sum Up Broke. Watch out for the old white label bootleg. Legitimate promo copies had stock labels and were stamped. Well, that is the thing about that. The one you can find, the easiest, the bang for your buck, is the Sundays mono release. A fantastic record of just really good country rock, honky tonk, no rock leads, no it's trying to be as pure as it can from a young, rock-based DNA with his artist direction for country music. So this is the Acid Archives, my latest contribution. Check out the link below to Dom's playlist of all these, and thank you for watching. Mazzy loves you. Stetson Stratoliner, not quite the cowboy hat, more the urban traveler Stetson made in Texas.